Hello, students. That's for you, Parker. So today we are moving on to chapter 6, and it's 6.1. The lesson is all about integers, and our learning target is going to say, I can read and graph integers. So we'll get that in our notes. And in our math books, we should be on page 250. And at the top, it talks a little bit about some different integers. The first one says positive numbers are greater than 0. They can be written with or without a positive sign. So positive numbers do not always have a plus sign in front of them. They can, but the plus sign is really the same as saying positive. And then it says negative numbers are less than 0. They're written with a negative sign. Negative numbers have to have the negative sign. So unlike positives, you have to have that little sign. So let's get down in our notes what positive and negative numbers are. So positive numbers, it said, are greater than 0. And if you wanted to put a sign to them, you would use the plus sign. And then negative numbers are all numbers that are less than 0. If you wanted to put a sign to those, which you have to, it's a minus or a negative sign. Subtraction is the same as saying negative, and addition is the same as saying positive. And then the next part on the top of 250 says two numbers that are the same distance from 0 on a number line, but on opposite sides of the 0 are called opposites. And one number that doesn't really have opposites is 0. So the opposite of 0 would be itself 0. So let's write down what opposites are. So opposites, two numbers that are the same distance from 0 on a number line. So with an opposite, put little brackets here, one has to be a positive and one has to be a negative for them to be opposites. The only one that doesn't work is 0. 0's opposite is itself, it's 0. The last highlighted word there in the key idea box says integers are a set of whole numbers and their opposites. So all whole numbers that are positive and negative are called integers. So we'll write down that word. We're going to say whole numbers and their opposites. All right, now that we've got a few vocabulary words down, some thinking happened there, we'll go ahead and get to our first examples. So example 1 is in the middle of the page on 250. We'll switch colors here real quick first. All right, it says writing positive and negative integers. Write a positive or negative integer that represents the situation. So example 1a has a statement for us, and we just have to write an integer, whether it be positive or negative, that represents that sentence. It says a contestant gains 250 points on a game show. So we'll write down that sentence. So there is a specific word in here that's going to help us determine whether it's going to be positive or negative, and that word is gains. Okay, so when you see that word gains, we're going to actually use a positive number here, and then we see our number in the statement, which is 250. So if we're going to assign an integer to the statement, it would be a positive 250, or you could just write it as 250 without the plus sign in the front. So a contestant gains 250, so that would just be positive 250. And statement B says gasoline freezes at 40 degrees below zero. And again, there is another word in here that helps us determine whether it's going to be positive or negative, and that's below. And actually below zero, both those words kind of help us. Remember, anything that's below zero is going to be negative. So below zero means we're going to have a negative sign. And then our number here is 40. So gasoline freezes at 40 degrees below zero. The integer that would represent that is negative 40. If you want to pause and try a couple on your own at the bottom of 250, go ahead and do that. All right, if you tried a few of those, number 1 is 900. Number 2 is negative 24. Number 3 is negative 5. And number 4 is 10. Looking at page 251 now, we're going to look at example 2 together. This one is graphing integers. So when you graph integers, you use something called a number line, which is just a straight line with tick marks on it. In this chapter, our tick marks are going to be above 0 and below 0. So this one says graph each integer and its opposite. So question A, we're going to graph 3 and its opposite. So if we make a straight line, that could be our number line. We'll put little arrows on the ends because our number line could go forever in both directions. We can put our 0 on the number line, and then we can make tick marks going up to this number here. So we have 1, 2, 3. I'm going to put a dot right on the number line. That is going to represent our number they give us. It also asks us to graph its opposite. So I'm going to put and opposite. So there's my 3. The opposite would be on the other side of the 0. So I have 1, 2, 3 tick marks. This first tick mark would be -1. Second one is -2. And the third one is -3. So I would put a dot on the -3. So -3 and +3 are opposites, and I have graphed them. Example 2b asks us to graph -2 and its opposite. So I'm going to make another number line, straight line with arrows on both ends. Make a tick mark that would represent the 0. Our original number this time is -2. So here would be -1, and here would be -2. So I'll put a dot there. That's our original number. Its opposite would be +2 on this side. So there's 1 and 2, and there's our -2 and its opposite. Moving on down to example 3. We'll change colors here. Example 3 is more of a real life situation where you would need some positive and negative numbers. You deliver flowers to an office building. You enter at ground level and go down 2 floors. You make the first delivery. Then you go up 7 floors to make the second delivery. So there's 2 questions they ask us based upon this situation. The first one says write an integer that represents each position. And the second one says write an integer that represents how you return to ground level. So let's write down the information they give us. We're talking about an office building. And anytime you go into a hotel or anytime there is some kind of elevator system, you can think about positive and negative numbers. The first statement says you enter at ground level. So we're going to write that part down. So if you think of an elevator like a number line that goes up and down, kind of like this. Okay, if we enter at ground level would probably be right here in the middle or at 0. So we're going to put a number to ground level. So we're going to say that that's going to be 0. Anytime we go up to the floors in this office building, that would be like positives. And then if we somehow go below 0, sometimes there's parking garages and office buildings and things like that. That could be considered negative numbers. The second statement it says is you go down 2 floors. So if I wanted to represent down 2 floors, down would be a negative number, and then we're going down 2. So if I'm going down 2 floors, I'm going to make 2 tick marks. Now I'm at -2 on my number line. And the third statement says you go up 7 floors. So we'll add that one to our list here. So if I am at -2 and I am going up 7, here's 1, 2, I have to make some more tick marks, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So I have just traveled up 7 tick marks. And that doesn't necessarily mean we end at +7. That just means I'm going up 7 tick marks. So the number that I'm going to associate with you go up 7 is a +7. So that all is question A. Question A said to write an integer that represents each position. So there is my 3 positions, 0, -2, and then +7. I have to start a new page here. Now the last one is question B. Question B says, write an integer that represents how you return to ground level. So if we are sitting right here, let's figure out what number that would represent. Here's our 0. So that would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So this tick mark would represent +5. So if I wanted to return to ground level, I need to go from the 5 back to 0. So if I'm going down, we probably want to make it a negative. So I'm at floor 5. And so I would go down 5 floors to get to ground level. So I'm going to go -5 to ground level since I'm traveling down. If you want to pause and try the next set on your own, they're at the bottom of 251. All right, so these ones are actually asked you to graph the integer and its opposite for 5 through 8. So it's kind of difficult to talk about what those would look like, but you should have a dot at the 6 and the -6 for number 5. And for number 6, you should have a dot at the +4 and -4. For number 7, you should have a dot at the 12 and the -12. For number 8, a dot should be at the +1 and the -1. And then for number 9, that one is similar to example 3. The answer would be -7. And that brings us to the end of lesson 1 from chapter 6.